All right, perfect.
Okay.
Welcome everybody to part 6, yay, of this 6-part virtual workshop series. My name is Sarah Milligan. I am the chair of the Education Committee for the Oklahoma Archivists Association. In addition to being the head of the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program, which is in the Oklahoma State University Library, as my non-Oklahoma Archivists Association gig. We are really excited to have you here as the tail end of the Archiving 101 Fundamentals of Collection Management series. As you all know by now, this is a program of the Oklahoma Archivists Association, which is an organization to promote networking and education for archives professionals, students, and record keepers in Oklahoma. This series is also sponsored by the Oklahoma Department of Libraries and the Oklahoma Historical Records Advisory Board, which has funding support from the National Historical Publications and Records Commission. We will be recording today's workshop for sharing later on the Oklahoma Archivists Association website. You can see past recorded webinars, including the previous 5 parts of this series, on the website under the resources tab. I would like to welcome you for today's series, which is on archival management, which we will focus today on leadership, planning, management, managing facilities, finances and technology, fundraising and development, public relations and marketing, which obviously are all really big things, but we're going to get you started. So today's session will be led by Nicole Willard. Nicole is the Assistant Director of the Max Chambers Library. She's been directing the Archives and Special Collections since 1995 and took on directing the Library Advancement and Communications in 2011. She's also managed assessment for the library since 1998. She's served 2 terms on the Oklahoma Historical Records Advisory Board as an Oklahoma Quality Examiner, on the executive committee of the Oklahoma Archivists Association, and is the chair of the Oklahoma State Archives and Record Commission. Welcome, Nicole. I will pass the reins to you and look forward to hearing what you have to say today.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Let me see if I can share my screen here. And can everybody see?
Yes.
Now you can see my screen?
Oh, wait, now I see your shared screen. I did see just your slideshow. Now I see your notes.
I don't know why this, okay, here, hold on, let me try this. Oh, not that.
I wonder if it is in the, yeah, you can hide presenter view.
I fixed this reverse of the way I had it last time and I just knew it worked, but of course not. Doesn't work. And I found where I could switch them earlier. This is just, oh, crap. I don't know how to fix it. Okay, let me, you share?
How about stop sharing?
How about this?
On
Here.
Zoom? If you stop, oh, hold on. Yeah, if you stop sharing on Zoom, there's your whole screen right now. That's all we see is your.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and try again. Sorry, guys.
That's okay. We got you.
Please have patience. And I got a full hour here, so I need to get going here. This is what I want right here.
Okay, that's just your slide deck right now. So no notes. I'll let you know if it changes.
So what you're seeing is my slide deck?
Just the PowerPoint screen, not
Okay.
any notes or anything.
Okay, so we're good? I can go?
We're good, yeah.
Okay. Okay, I can't see the Zoom thing, so I don't know if anybody will ask questions or anything, but I'm sure JJ will monitor that.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye out and I'll let you know if it reverts back to the.
Okay, hopefully it won't.
Yeah.
Okay, so Sarah said I'm Nicole Willard. I have all my information there on the screen so that if you need anything or have any questions or need help, any kind of assistance, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm always happy to help. And I really want to thank everybody who has contributed to this series. It has only happened with lots of collaboration and coordination from those people who are really dedicated to making the archives profession in Oklahoma an impactful and influential association. And Sarah Milligan, as chair of our education committee, has worked really hard wrangling all of us to offer value to our members through professional development opportunities. And also thank you to all of our presenters who committed to sharing their expertise, Holly, Kara, and Jennifer. And of course, thank you, JJ, for being our flexible techie person. Okay, so today I'm going to start out with the resources page. I know that normally we find the resources at the end of the presentation, but because of the nature of our topic, I think it's more useful to discuss it before we start. Because when I started to prepare for this webinar, I pulled out my 5-year-old lectures because that's how long it's been since I've taught this class. And I realized many things have changed and that I really probably needed to do another literature review. So there are some fundamental functions of management that are sort of proven approaches that are not as susceptible to fads or trends. And I want to look at those 5 functions, but I also wanted to look at and address current topics that you are likely to deal with today. For example, what do you do when there's a global crisis? That's something that is not addressed in any of the management literature for archives management. So I started scouring current sources, and what I found was really very dated. Few sources actually dealt with actually managing an archival repository, and most that did predated 2005. So I then turned to our trusted sources, NARA, SAA, LAA, and I really didn't find much more there. Now let me be clear here. There are plenty of current titles on managing specific aspects of an archive, like managing a digital archive or managing marketing and outreach or managing preservation, but really not much on the actual management of an archive. These trusted sources do, however, offer blogs that, while brief, do contain some good information. The National Archives, in the interest of sharing more information with the public about their activities, maintain multiple blogs, 19 to be exact. The first URL listed here is a listing of all their blogs from the blog that comes from the Archivist of the United States, to Annotation, which you all might be familiar with, which is the blog for NHPRC. The presidential libraries also have blogs here. My favorite blog here is Text Message. It's called Text Message, and it's a blog of the Textual Records Division of the National Archives. And different staff members write this one, and they talk about their projects and how they process, the kind of equipment they use, the workflows they use, just all about the production process. And sometimes it's real informative. Sometimes it's just about new collections and how to access them. They provide information to researchers on how to access them. Much like the National Archives, the Society of American Archivists also has a blog page where you'll find like Ask an Archivist blog, and SNAP, which is Students and New Archives Professional blog. They do also do blog series where they look for guest artists, like A Day in the Life, where they want our authors to describe a day in the life of an archivist. That blog series is pretty interesting. Then we can't leave out the Internet Archive, the world's largest public web archive. And of course, everything there is free and publicly accessible because their mission is to provide universal access to all knowledge. So they focus on preserving human knowledge by creating a digital library of permanently stored digital content that from all over the world that can be viewed by anyone at any time. They're also the ones who built Archivit. I know we've all heard of that. And they actually began in 1996 by archiving the internet itself. And you can access web history through the Wayback Machine. Many of you might be already familiar with this. But there is a link there. And if you ever wanted to go back and look at your web page from 2000, you could do that. And I have used it from time to time for going back and reviewing past web pages. The one book that I would recommend as a reference tool is by Gregory Hunter, and it's called Developing and Maintaining Practical Archives. Hunter is a well-known professional in the archives field. He served as editor of the American Archivist for 6 years. He also served as principal archivist and records manager on a team that was headed by Lockheed Martin to build the Electronic Records Archives, or ERA, for the National Archives and Records Administration. The project started back in 2005 with a $308 million contract. And as a result of this, Dr. Hunter is the co-inventor of 4 patents in the area of digital preservation that were submitted by the project team. So this guy knows a whole lot about archives. And he also is a professor in the Palmer School of Library and Information Science at Long Island University. So he knows a lot. And his book, he recently updated it. In 2020, he published the 3rd edition of his book. And it's just a really great practical reference for anyone in the archive field. I would highly recommend, if you're managing archives, to purchase it. When I was teaching, I used to use it as a textbook for my class, because while he touches a little on theory here and there, it really is more a how-to book. And so if you're trying to figure out how to do anything in managing your archive, it is a really great resource. And you can purchase a new copy from ALA for $85, or you might find it used on Amazon. And he had not updated his edition since 2001. So there are a lot of changes to this edition. 2 new chapters include community archives and, of course, diversity and inclusion. The other thing that his 2001 book did not address was digitization. And instead of allocating digitization to a chapter in his book, what Hunter states in his preface is that he has incorporated digital records management throughout every chapter alongside discussion with analog materials. And really, this reflects the pervasiveness and the importance of digital records management for archives today. So his book really does provide a good basic framework for the novice archivist and is a great introductory resource. I also wanted to look at management issues and challenges just globally, because these are issues you're going to face in archives. And so I looked at the McKinsey Global Institute. The McKinsey Global Institute has the mission of helping leaders in the commercial, public, and social sectors to develop a deeper understanding of the evolution of our global economy and to provide fact-based to help decision-making on critical issues. And they put out a quarterly report that is their flagship business publication. It's called the McKinsey Quarterly. And it has been defining and informing senior management since about 1965. And what they do is they hire industry experts to conduct surveys and research in particular industries that informs their overall work. So they cover about anything and everything in management, just as a whole. So reviewing all of these sources and pulling on my own 25 years of experience managing in archives, I came up with a list of 10 sort of management issues you're likely to face in the workplace today. So what I want to do is take a look at the 5 functions that are the mainstays in management, and then I want to share this list of 10 current trends and challenges facing the management profession as a whole today. So let's get started. We'll define management real quick. And Hunter in his book pulls from Wilstead and Nolte's definition of management, that management is the exercise of responsibility for the effective use of human, financial, and other resources available to meet an organization's objectives. Over the last 100 years, as the management profession has evolved, there have really been 5 basic functions that have remained constant, and Hunter covers these in more detail in his book. Because of time constraints, I'm just going to get to touch on these, but he goes in much more detail into all these topics. So I highly recommend y'all purchasing his book. First, we have planning, short-term and long-term. We're going to talk about these individually. Organizing, this is basically managing your resources, which really means monitoring resources. Staffing, which is managing your employees. Directing, for me, this is mostly about communication for organizational growth. And then controlling, which is basically, for me, measuring outcomes. So let's look at these individually. When we talk about planning, we do short-term planning and we do long-term strategic planning. But planning forces us to define our goals and objectives, which then helps us to articulate and justify our programs, especially to those outside of our organization. And planning also determines how resources will be allocated and helps keep the project on track and hopefully under control. So we have to plan, right? There's no way around planning. You're not going to understand any of your successes or how your resources are allocated unless you plan. Planning also ensures that you are not just responding to day-to-day crises. I call this flying by the seat of your pants. And I have worked under managers who that's how they operated. And it's very unnerving. So really what planning does is furnishes a framework for accountability. So you're going to be planning if you're managing an archive. When we talk about organizing, there's a few different things that fit under organizing, and managing finances is one of them, which really means marshaling and monitoring resources. But almost every archivist is going to need to prepare a budget at some point in your career. And Michael Kurtz says, and he's the assistant archivist for records service at the National Archives, says that accurate, realistic budget projections provide an aura of legitimacy for the archival program in competition for resources within a larger organization. And when I read that, it really hit home with me because, I'm in an archive within a library within a university, and I have to fight for the resources that I get from my library. We've got a big library here, and I'm just one department fighting for those resources. So when you can legitimize your program in any way, it's going to help you, it's going to support your efforts to articulate your program, justify it, and get resources for it. But budgets really serve three interrelated purposes. We use budgets for planning, we use budgets for coordinating, and we use budgets to control or measure. And budgets usually fall into two categories. You usually have an operating budget and a capital budget. Operating budgets are for the day-to-day operations or the short-term goals of the organization, while capital budgets are required for long-term projects like construction or major equipment. And capital budgets are often developed through fundraising activities. Here at the university, we raise money for capital projects through fees. And there is a library fee when you enroll in a class at UCO that we use to, for example, replace our elevators, which we did just a couple of years ago, because, building as old as ours has always got something breaking down. So we have got to have funds for that. But if you're a historical institution or a historical society or a small heritage center, you may need to do fundraising to raise money to deal with capital projects, like if you have a leaky roof or something. Archives processing is a major expense in any archival repository. So I like to break down arrangement and description into two basic costs. You have your supply costs and your staff costs. Supply costs are the easier ones to estimate. The major archival supplies we purchase are acid-free boxes and folders. I buy lots of records boxes, the cubic foot ones, and lots of manuscript size boxes. And as you all know, these things are not cheap. Staff costs can be a little bit more difficult to determine. Archival work is very labor intensive, as you know, and the time required to process a collection can vary greatly depending upon the nature of the materials and also on the condition before processing. In his book, Hunter quotes one study that concluded on average, it took over 25 hours to completely process 1 cubic foot of records. And so if you figure at a cost of, say, $15 an hour for labor, that would equal to about $375 to process an average cubic foot of records. So you need to keep that in mind when you're budgeting. That same study also indicated that photographs could take up to 47 hours per cubic foot to process. So that's a total cost of 705 dollars per cubic foot. So processing archival collections for preservation does not come cheaply. And this is why the appraisal decisions that we talked about in the very first session are so important. It costs a great deal of money to process. I don't say junk, I'll say stuff. The other resource you may end up managing, depending on the size of your organization, is technology. Here, we're not talking about managing digital records, but rather managerial aspects of selecting and maintaining information technology within your archives itself. Technology is perhaps the most volatile component of managing any business today because of the ever-increasing speed of technological change. And our ever-growing dependence on technology really requires a surprising amount of management. Issues range from specialized support staff who handle technology-related issues like upgrading, compatibility, conversioning, backing up data. I mean, do you all know how to preserve your address book if you get a new computer? That's something I had to learn after losing it the 2 times before. Planning on ongoing replacements and upgrades, also another one, as new generations of hardware and software become available, somebody's going to have to do that. Maintaining hardware and software when issues arise, like viruses or other computer glitches. Do you know how to take care of those things? Providing staff training for new systems and hardwares is also a management issue. Another really big issue has been for most of us is virtual space. With the increase of digital objects, particularly video and audio, which require a tremendous amount of space. Managing this space becomes an issue, particularly backing it up. And then there's website administering. So if you're going to have a website, who will host it and who will maintain it? I'm really fortunate that in my organization, we have an IT department and a library we can call on for all these needs. But there was a time when I had to be the IT person in the archives, purchasing and upgrading new hardware and software. And I learned a lot about technology, having to manage it. But I'm really glad now that I don't have to keep up with any of that stuff anymore, and that I have somebody who can help me with those needs. But fortunately, there is a lot of good educational technology resources out there. All you have to do is Google what you need, and you're going to find help. That's the fortunate thing about managing technology. But technology is here to stay. It's going to be an issue always going forward, and it presents all of these issues. And we have evolved from me doing it all to now we have a whole team of IT people who do this for the whole library. Public relations is also something that you'll be responsible for organizing as a manager. And when establishing a development strategy, you'll need to consider several components, and determining the answer to the questions listed here might help guide you. You'll need to determine if a friends group or advisory board would be beneficial in helping you raise funds for your organization. Influential members of an advisory board can garner influence and apply appropriate pressure on your administrators or their own network of friends in helping you to raise needed funds. They can also lend prestige to your efforts. We have a friends group here, and we also have an advisory board, and our friends group is really the fundraising arm of the library. And we used to do an annual fundraiser every year, and we raise less and less money every year. We also used to have a 3-day book sale, and we raised less money every year. So we stopped doing both of those things because they weren't being very productive. And we still continue to sell books. We just do it differently now. We have about 5 or 6 different revenue streams for selling our books. And we went from raising about $2,000 at our 3-day book sales to last year, we raised a little over $30,000 selling the books the way we do. So even having these development strategies, you always have to be looking at what's working and what's not. And if something's not working, stop doing it and find a different way to approach it. You also might consider an annual campaign. We have a foundation here at UCO that does an annual campaign, and after many years of begging, we were able to get the library listed on their brochures. And as a result of that, when they do an annual campaign, we see the checks roll in, because there are people who are, have fond memories of the library during their student experience, and they want to give us support. And so we see money. We also do a membership drive, an annual membership drive for our FOL group, where we just encourage our friends to continue their support. But an annual campaign can be used to help you expand your base of support to meet your regular operating needs. If you have some major expenses like the need for a new building or equipment, you might consider a capital campaign to raise funds for this. It can be expensive in terms of developing the literature and the mailing. So you have to consider the cost to benefit ratio of a campaign. But it's worth examining. And we have done campaigns that didn't work as well as campaigns that did work. So I'm all about trying. And that is one of my management styles. I say, let's try it. If it doesn't work, we learn and we move on. But it's always a learning opportunity. Public relations is another thing that you'll be organizing as a manager. Despite being closely related to, I want to note that public relations and marketing, while often confused, are different. Their purposes are different. Some of the techniques they use can be the same, but the reason for public relations is to have a planned and sustained effort that establishes and maintains goodwill and mutual understanding between your organization and the public that you deal with. So public relations is really all about goodwill and mutual understanding. And there's a number of ways that you can maintain this, create it, establish it, and maintain it. Among the most common ways that archives try to establish a positive image include this list of activities here: press releases, press kits, articles, newspaper journals, annual reports. I mean, the list goes on. And if you want more information about any of these, there are several books out there about managing public relations in an archive that will go into detail about any one of these activities. And I just want to mention marketing as well. Marketing, on the other hand, focuses on identifying and meeting customer needs for services and products. The steps involved require defining your product or service and then effectively pushing it out. And today, marketing also includes social media. We do, I would say, the majority of our marketing on social media now, because we know that's where our students are. And we know, based on our social media, who our students are. We know that 75% of our market are females between the age of 18 and 24. So social media marketing can really help you to understand your target audience. The next big issue or function for managing any business is staffing. And leading people is important in an organization of any size. Peter Drucker, one of my favorite management gurus, said that executives spend more time on managing people and making people decisions than on anything else. And they should. No other decision is so long-lasting in their consequences or difficult to unmake. And this statement is so true. And I'm not ashamed to admit that this is probably my least favorite part of managing, because it is so unpredictable. you may only get an hour with a candidate a day, if you're lucky, to determine if they're going to be a good fit for your organization. And I have to say, I've made a couple of bad choices that cost me. So I have lived and learned on this one. But sometimes you just can't tell. But managing staff really includes three essential elements. We have personnel selection, performance evaluation, and then professional development. And in terms of selection, you want to write a good position description that flows from your mission and clearly states the responsibilities of the position and any educational other requirements. Then you're going to advertise it. Probably the most cost-effective way to advertise these specialized positions is through professional organizations or internet discussion groups or listservs. But I also believe in the power of Indeed. In fact, I have Indeed email me any new archival positions posted so I can stay up with the market. We use Indeed to market positions here, and I would say most of our applicants have probably come from those Indeed ads. Then you're going to need to screen your applicants once you get a good pool. Hopefully you get a good pool. And a new feature that has quickly replaced phone interviews are Zoom interviews, which are great for pre-screening to determine if you might want to invite somebody for a personal interview. Usually the content and the nature of interviews is governed by organizational policies and procedures. Here at UCO, we have to take a course offered by HR called Screening Committee Training before we can actually serve on a screening committee to hire somebody. In this training, they discuss best practices as well as what you can and cannot ask based on Fair Employment Act, which prescribes what employers are obligated, that they're obligated not to discriminate against a person's race, color, creed, nationality, age, or disability. And there is pretty prescribed what you can and cannot ask. And so they gave us a list of things that, I mean, you can't ask somebody's age. Here's one that I learned the hard way. I had somebody who was applying for a position. She had 3 children, and I asked her about daycare. Well, you cannot do that unless they bring it up first. You cannot do that. So I learned the hard way about that. She did not like that I asked her whether she had daycare or not. And I only asked because the person who she was replacing, I struggled because she didn't have good daycare. Anyway, they teach us about those things, and it is very helpful. Then, of course, you make the final selection, and hopefully you have selected a good candidate that's going to make your team stronger. The other thing with personnel you're going to have to deal with are performance evaluations. It's important for employees to understand what is expected of them within a certain time period. And a written performance plan can really help that process. And if you develop it with your employee, it's really the best way to clarify the evaluation. And the plan should also include some standards or measures so that both the employee and you can monitor performance regularly. And we here are required to give annual performance reviews for each employee under our supervision. And if the plan is developed with the employee, the review is really more collegial in spirit and congenial. But of course, the main objective is always to keep the archival program moving towards its goals. And I like to give ongoing feedback, and really, I think it's almost required. Some people don't do this, but I think it's required to keep your employees engaged in understanding their contribution to the organization. So I try to provide feedback regularly over the course of every project we work on in the archives. And then every employee should have a professional development plan. During our planning and review cycle, really throughout the year, I am always evaluating. Sometimes they don't know it, but I'm always watching my employees and looking at areas where I might see they have knowledge or skill gaps. trying to identify them, because I think an effective manager is good at developing or helping an employee develop a professional development plan for them to help them improve in those areas where they might have some gaps. And of course, a plan like this might include attending seminars or workshops or things like we're doing today, formal courses, anything that can help improve their skills in an area that's going to make them do their job better. So when we look at the life of an employee will go through stages in their professional life. They'll begin as an apprentice, where they are learning the ropes and are depending on other more senior staff. Then they become a colleague, an independent professional who can contribute as an equal member of the team. Then they might progress to mentor, in which they assume the responsibility for others and help with professional development of staff. And then finally, you might become a manager, where you have responsibility for shaping direction and exercising power. And sometimes you don't go through it in these steps. I feel like when I began, I definitely suffered from imposter syndrome, because I felt like I was an apprentice jumping into a manager role. But after 25 years now, I feel like I have filled that role. So directing is the other major function of managing in an archive, and directing is really about leading through communication. And communication just helps to provide clarity. Confusion and uncertainty and ambiguity make people really uncomfortable, and it also makes them very uncooperative. So making roles and responsibilities and relationships clear gives everyone the information they need to do their job and to understand their contribution to the organization. Effective communication can really reduce the cost associated with conflicts, misunderstandings, and mistakes. According to McKinsey, when project team members are in conflict, each adds 30% overhead to the project. So conflict cost, and it's kind of esoteric, we can't see it, but it does have a cost. So the culture that builds relationships by promoting open communication will reduce tension between employees and will create a more collegial environment and foster more teamwork and encourage more cooperation. Organizational culture is another thing that, while you might not directly think about it, you and how you lead will impact it. All organizations have a culture. So what does that mean? What do we mean when we say that? So let me just say, in a healthy culture, the guiding beliefs and the daily practices are in conformity. So the organization does what it believes and believes what it does. For example, let's say the organization both says that it values customers and it shows that in its daily activities. In an unhealthy organization, there is a lot of discontinuity between guiding beliefs and daily principles. Let's say the organization says it values customers, but then it treats them shabbily. So there's some discontinuity there. In the best organizations, employees have internalized the culture's beliefs in such a way that they now act without having to consult procedural manuals or look at policies. For example, if the culture of the business is to emphasize customer satisfaction, then frontline employees should be authorized and encouraged to act in a way that meets the customer's needs without having to check with their supervisor or consult written documentation. So it empowers the employee really to do their job and to effectively communicate your guiding principles. So how you lead and how you manage will have an influence on organizational culture at your institution. And so you need to be aware of that. The last function is controlling. And really this to me is measuring. We use control to determine our success by measuring performance, reviewing budget allocations, and evaluating milestones and achievements. It's really important when you're managing in archives that both responsibility and effectiveness are at the heart of your approach and what you do. So I'm running through these really quickly. I've touched on these 5 major functions of management. And as I said, Hunter's book goes into each of these in full detail. So if you didn't get as much as you wanted here, get the book. I highly recommend. So real quick, I'm going to touch on these 10 challenges that sort of I identified working just in management today. So many cultural organizations are small in size and have limited resources. So whether your organization has paid staff or relies entirely on volunteers, the number of personnel dedicated to the management and care of heritage collections may be as few as 1 person who may or may not be professionally trained. So the hats that you may have to wear managing an archival repository can be really varied. But one of the biggest challenges that I face in my work world today is being a working manager. So I'm one who performs work while also managing the organization. In archival repositories where staffing and funding can be limited, both managing and working on projects may be unavoidable. But when you're both working and managing simultaneously, it can sometimes become impossible, especially with larger projects or in larger organizations. And when a conflict between the two arises, one ends up taking precedence while the other gets neglected. And for me, it's the work because the management seems to demand more time. But a lot of people would say they stay in the work and the management suffers. But regardless, one is going to suffer. So to combat this, some things you can do are to clearly identify project requirements, because effectively utilizing your resources will ultimately determine the success of your project and will keep you on track. You also want to define critical milestones. These are effective indicators of your team's dedication to the success of the project. So each milestone you reach is a success and it really should be celebrated. And lastly, you want to tap into your team members' strengths and weaknesses. If employees enjoy what they are doing, they will do a better job. This will ensure faster task completion and better time management. So when you have everyone on the team putting sort of their best foot forward or putting their strength forward, it will really ensure the success of your organization. And this is something that, for a long time in HR, they'd say you don't write the job description for the person, you write the job description for the job. And what I have found in my 25 years of managing an archive is that while I write a job description, when I hire somebody, what I do is identify what they're really good at. And if it suits my management needs, that's what I let them do, regardless of whether it's in their job description or not. Now, there may be some HR managers that would be cringing to hear me say that, but that is what I have found to be the most successful, is you really try to find out what people are good at, because what people are good at are usually what they like doing. And if people are doing what they like, they're going to do it better. It's just how it is. Trust but verify. This is something that I deal with a lot with newer employees. As a manager, you might become accustomed to dealing with information that is incomplete, optimistic, or inaccurate. And it's not that employees intentionally provide inaccurate information, but perhaps they weren't thorough enough, or maybe they exaggerated a finding in their own exuberance. So this is something you'll have to be mindful of. And this is, in an archive, we like to be detail oriented. So we like to get it right, right? So you just have to stay really savvy. And I'm always checking information and trying to figure out what the best questions are to ask to prove validity, right? And as I understand or get to know a new employee better, and as they learn and progress, and I become more aware of their capabilities, it allows me to become more reliable. But for a long while with new employees, I am doing a lot of confirming of accuracy and completeness of information that they supply. And a good manager is going to learn to read people. And that means listening to what they say as well as listening to what they don't say, because in what they don't say is where I have found some of the biggest clues. I also ask my staff, I tell them when they start, please ask lots of questions, because when they ask questions, it clues me into where they're at in their learning. I am always really leery of an employee who isn't asking questions, because it's difficult for me to evaluate their knowledge when they're not asking questions. Uncertainty about the future. So we're going to jump into some global crisis planning here. The McKinsey did a study, and they determined that 80% of managers are acting without a comprehensive vision of how and why changes that are being made in their organizations are impacting their organization. And a lot of this has to do with the pandemic, because people are really uncertain about what the future is going to bring. The pandemic has served really only to accelerate this trend. And according to McKinsey, existing management models no longer address the challenges that crisis presents. You know, COVID has took us to a whole new crisis level. And I'm sure we're going to have special management books come out just about that topic. But we have had to change the way we do business. I'm sure we have all said or asked the same question at some point. Will things ever go back to normal, or is this the new normal? This creates a lot of uncertainty, and there are consequences to all this uncertainty. For instance, it can impact our mental well-being and decision-making. We may find ourselves more prone to making rash decisions. Likewise, we might find ourselves putting off decisions until we have more data points to work from. So some tips for dealing with this, I would say the best way to deal with uncertainty is to embrace the fact that it's here to stay indefinitely. Unless artificial intelligence becomes smart enough to predict the future, we're going to be dealing with uncertainty. And so managers really should consider reevaluating their current operating models in light of this uncertainty. If you haven't yet done any scenario planning, it's a good practice if you want to incorporate it into your strategic approach. At UCO, because of funding cuts we have been sustaining, we've had to develop various scenarios to address future funding cuts. If you start planning for future scenarios now, you'll be better equipped to deal with them when they eventually arrive, because we can't really predict the future, but we can try to make ourselves future-proof. And I touched on employee well-being, but just to emphasize this, employee well-being has also been highlighted because of the pandemic. The pandemic has clearly proven to be an ominous threat, impacting the health of both individuals and businesses. Research shows that 93% of employees said they have struggled with their well-being in 2020. That's almost everybody, you know, and 73% of them said that those effects were linked to struggles with the pandemic. So workers are feeling the impact on their well-being of the crisis we've been undergoing for the last 2 years. Also, workers who have shifted from office work to working remotely have reported feeling less connected to their colleagues. There's also job insecurity that continues, with 23% of the workforce fearing that they may lose their source of income. These are all stats that I pulled from McKinsey. So these health and safety concerns also related to the return to the workplace, which was something we dealt with, also fuel anxiety for employees. So if all these stats stressed you out, I'm here to probably try and give you some hope. a lot of times people think that working, um, improving your skills is about the only way you can move up. But redesigning your work schemes to promote your employees' well-being and to support a hybrid workforce will go a long way in making your employees feel better. This is really something I struggled with in the beginning of the pandemic, because we have some really immunocompromised people who work the front line here at the library who were probably swung to the other side of the pendulum. So we had to really work hard at trying to find a balance between offering services and making our employees feel comfortable working here, actually physically being here. And that's what we need to do. We need to ensure that our employees have what they need to do their job, including in the environment. The next issue is recruiting and onboarding the right talent. Recruiting has never been an easy task. 45% of employers struggle to find talent with the right skills, and today's hiring managers do not have an easy job. After all, they have to contend with and adapt to trends brought on by the pandemic. Think virtual recruitment here and remote work arrangements. But talent acquisition strategies probably also need to be re-examined in view of attracting a diverse candidate pool. And once you've done that, then you really need to concoct a really great onboarding experience to deliver to your new recruits. Here at UCO, our HR department does a 2-day employee orientation. Then each department is encouraged to do their own onboarding process. And with a Gallup poll reporting that 88% of employees said they were deprived of a proper onboarding experience, here's your chance to not add to that statistic. So some things that you can try to do to future-proof new hires to ensure they're in it for the long run, are to align with your company's missions, are going to require some really strong recruitment strategies. Referrals is a good place to start. Ask people who already work for you. Employees often have an extensive network to tap into. Remember the old adage, you get by with a little help from your friends? Well, with 48% of businesses saying that their quality hires come from employee referrals, this is a tactic that makes a lot of sense. And that percentage came from an Indeed report that was done in 2018. Social networking is also another way to find the right talent. Hiring managers are increasingly sourcing talent through social media networks. In fact, 95% of companies surveyed said they successfully hired from LinkedIn, while 24% pointed to Facebook and 16% credited Twitter. So social networks are a great way to find talent with the right skills that you need.
Nicole,
Yes.
I just wanted to give you a 5-minute heads up.
Thank you.
So 5 minutes till 3. We can probably stay on a few minutes late, obviously, and since it's being recorded, but
Okay. Diversity and inclusion, that's the big one, right? And the pandemic has really highlighted this as well. Ensuring diversity and inclusion in the workplace has become one of the biggest challenges facing today's modern organizations. And diversity in the workplace is sort of defining and establishing the difference between diversity and inclusion. Diversity in the workplace focuses on respecting and appreciating all employees for their differences, whether it be ethnicity, age, religion, education, gender, disability, whatever. Where inclusion, on the other hand, focuses on ensuring that all employees feel valued and supported as individuals, irrespective of their physical or cultural differences. Here we are talking about really the impact of unconscious bias. And one of the things that we can do to address this is as managers to commit to a diversity and inclusion agenda this year. Initiatives need to be practiced and communicated among all members of your staff. And having metrics to measure your efforts is also a good idea. Some things hiring managers may do to improve their recruitment strategies might be to attract a more diverse pool of candidates, might be to include things like starting with a diverse hiring team or considering a wider variety of hiring sources. But it's probably a good idea to evaluate your hiring practices and including diversity and inclusion in those approaches. Technology and digitization, this probably goes without saying. It's really, communications with your team members is really critical, and it can mean the difference between a great team and just an average team. But research from McKinsey showed that 97% of workers consider communication to have a meaningful impact on their daily tasks. And a lot of this now is more informal with email. We don't have those formal sort of chains of communication anymore. And so we are probably more in constant communication than we ever were before. But in spite of that, 71% of employees say they don't engage or read company emails or content. So if 2020 has taught us nothing else, it's how to drive team collaboration and communication, particularly between remote and virtual teams. Ensure that your communication content is clear and simplistic. As Brene Brown says, clear is kind. So the clearer you can make it, the easier it is for everybody. Engagement is really a key. So managers should not hesitate to explore different communication channels. There are some managers who have adopted gamification and social learning strategies to really level up engagement. And you can Google those. There's some interesting stuff on that. I'm moving through these pretty quick. High staff turnover is another big one. And this is really hitting home right now today as people are leaving jobs by the millions. It's mind-boggling to me. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong slide. Digitization and technology. Digitization is really no longer an option, but a necessary mode of survival. It is a monumental change we've seen in 2020 with organizations. Those who pivoted to digital business models have thrived, and those who didn't, well, they probably aren't here anymore. But there is increased pressure today for managers to keep up as technology continues to evolve. And so you're going to face the challenges of finding the right software solutions or hardware to invest in on behalf of your organization. And despite a veritable treasure trove of technological solutions out there, you still need to take the time to consider what you really need. What problems are you trying to solve? You want to avoid the lure of buying the most sophisticated or popular technology in the industry. Oftentimes, the right solution is the simplest one. So look at tools or platforms that will best fit your organization and your customers. You might also look at what stage you are at in the digitization process or where your company is, and try to determine whether it's time to maybe level up your existing infrastructure. We're kind of looking at that now, introducing a digitization lab. Now we have high staff turnover, and this is something that every industry is dealing with. They say that the average time spent in a job is 4.2 years. I can't relate to that since I've been here for almost 30. But this is even less for millennials. I think they said millennials will have 8 to 10 jobs over the course of their careers. And with all this job hopping, keeping good talent is going to be hard. And if you fail to do so, there is a cost. They say that it costs 33% of an employee's annual salary to replace them. And this only goes up the more expert your staff who is leaving is. So that they say it can cost 400% to replace an expert senior staff member. But some tips here, you want to train to retrain. It's easy to assume retraining staff is all about offering more money or annual promotions. But the good news, that's not always the case. Teams, usually employees want to learn. Research shows that 65% of employees say development and training opportunities would increase their company loyalty. So offering professional development opportunities and encouraging your employees to grow their skills are going to make them probably stay longer and be more loyal to your company. The last and final one is employee engagement, and we kind of touched on this through these others, but it is one of the biggest challenges of our times. And research shows that engaged employees are more productive, more creative, and less likely to leave. Therefore, it's not surprising that 88% of businesses are seeking ways to improve employee engagement. It's a big challenge, especially with remote learning. Silos can develop and remote teams can be become disengaged. And so one of the tips here that I could offer is, I say epic meaning, and I call it epic meaning. And what I mean is it's the key really to employee engagement, because it is what I think is the sort of the powerful intrinsic motivator that drives all of our actions. We all have intrinsic motivating meaning factors that make us do everything that we do, whether it's what we buy or what we do at work. It's really our sense of desire or our purpose to make a difference. So when it comes to your team, epic meaning is the ingredients that emotionally connects employees to your organization. And when you engage employees by ensuring epic meaning is at the heart of all you do through your communications, your weekly meetings, your training, it makes sure that each team member understands how their actions at work benefit them and the organization. So these are my final words. I did have another slide because I went out, I wanted to know what the National Archives' biggest challenges are, and I found them most basic. Here they are: lack of skilled labor, lack of fire detectors, electricity problems. How basic does that get? And then a lack of modern equipment and tools. So, I mean, they're facing the same things that we all are. And then one last note I had, because if all of this isn't enough, we all got to think about blockchain now, because the Open Data Institute in the UK is researching whether blockchain could be part of the answer to ensure that our public archives are trusted, unaltered, and auditable. And they have established what they call the Archangel project, which started back in 2018 when the Open Data Institute partnered with UK's National Archives at Kew to join the Archangel project. And basically it's a collaborative research tool which aims to understand how, and I know this is going to make any sense, but I'm just throwing it out there so you've heard it at least once. But their aim is to understand how distributive ledger technology, or DLT, system might be used as a mechanism to verify what objects have not been, to verify that objects have not been altered or adapted while stored in digital archives. So blockchain's on our horizon too, believe it or not, and it's all about algorithms. So that wraps it up. I apologize for going over. If we just started out like I should have, it probably wouldn't have gone over. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
It was only 5 minutes, so it could be way worse. So, all right. Well, we do have a few minutes for questions before we need to wrap up. So if anybody has any, I will say if you've been putting things in the chat that are questions, you need to re-put those. The main internet source that I was on crashed, so that's okay. I'm back in. I lost the chat though, so.
Did we lose JJ too? I think we lost JJ too.
Yeah, I knew that was going to happen though.
Oh, I didn't hear you say that.
Okay. Oh, good. I'm so happy that this made sense in the context. So thank you for this presentation. It's very informative. Definitely went above and beyond expectations for the subject matter. So
Oh, thanks. It was a lot to cram into an hour.
That's nice. It is a lot, but you touched on all the pieces. All right. Well, I think at this point we can go ahead and wrap up. And I know you all have seen Nicole's contact information, and I will share the slides here in a few minutes or whenever my network connection comes back up. And another survey, thank you for you all that have been taking the surveys. It does help us figure out future programming and how to tweak what we're doing. I want to give one final thanks to the committee members, the education committee members for the Oklahoma Archivists Association. As Nicole mentioned at the beginning of this has been put together because a lot of people have worked really hard about this. And so Nicole is on our education committee, Kara Newby, who's the current Oklahoma Archivists Association president, Jennifer Green, who is the Oklahoma Archivists Association past president, Julie Lyles, Mary Larson, and JJ Compton. I really appreciate everyone's work and time going into this. So thank you again, and expect an email from me. Don't forget the Introduction to Scanning workshop coming up on December 8th. There will be information coming out soon. At least the dates and a short blurb are on the OAA website under upcoming webinars or upcoming events. So thank you for your time, your patience. We hope you learned something, and we look forward to seeing you at future Oklahoma Archivists Association events.